How many of you know what a GIS is? All of you? So I prepared this speech for people who didn't know anything about it. So there you go. So here we go. What Chris and others asked me to do is basically go through a profile of what a GIS is. Are any of you GIS practitioners here? 3, 4, okay. A GIS is actually an information system about geographic stuff. And also what Chris and HG asked me to do is to tell you about where I'm from. I'm from an organization called Esri. It has about 10,000 workers. We work on building geographic information software, supporting our users. This was a startup about 5 decades ago and continues to be a startup in some ways. We have about 4 million users who are using various parts of our technologies. 3,300 of them are utility companies, pretty much all the big ones around the world. This is a technology that is interesting to me. It has always been interesting to me since I was just a kid. And today, as previous speakers, including this morning's speaker, talked about, our world is changing rapidly. We are learning how to virtually measure everything that moves and changes, and then make that available on networks. That's just a profound idea, like a nervous system for the planet. Everything that moves and changes, pulsing. And maps, of course, I'm a little biased on this, maps and GIS are becoming a kind of essential way for us to understand and manage the stuff that's being measured. It's like a fundamental language. And some of the previous speakers talked about that, the notion of how do we understand this massive amount of data that's coming to us. So maps certainly are a common language that people understand. And GIS as a framework that is a data framework that can make maps are just sort of standing up, just beginning is the way I would say it. Why is it so essential? Because it's providing not only a way to bring all content together, the spatial dimension, but it's also providing an interesting contextual language, because I can see the content in context, and I can do that for almost everything. Demographic data, banking data, asset data, driving cars, atmosphere, virtually everything that describes the world that we live in, geography, thus its name. These are just a few slides that I pulled from our users in the space of utilities. And certainly GIS has been used for asset management and also work management about assets, whether it be pipes and wires and facilities, or whether it's about projects and how people are managing the projects, or work management, or doing emergency planning, work or planning in general. These users actually are using GIS for optimizing or planning or analyzing. And I'll call your attention here to the one on the lower left. That's UPS. Today, last year, they saved $400 million using GIS as a way to optimize their trucks. And this is a company that already had optimized a lot of their networks, just a great organization. But squeezing out a few minutes here and a few minutes there not only saved enormous amounts of money, but also fuel and wear and tear on their trucks. These other examples show site selection using the overlay of maps, or economic investments, economic development, looking at supply chain, like movement from depots to various gas stations, or SAP, for example, is using it to manage all of their global sales. These are big organizations. In these examples, we see GIS being used as a way to plan for and also respond during natural disaster events, hurricanes, assessing vulnerable populations. Where is the hail fall in the United States? Tracking hurricanes, understanding who it's going to affect, understanding the assets underneath it so that we can understand and predict in advance the impact of outage. Maps are also becoming a language on the web for storytelling. These examples show story maps, and today about 30 million of these will be viewed. About 500 new story maps will be authored, and there's like half a million of these story maps that are in circulation. So people are learning, and in the utility space this is intriguing because it's like I can talk to my customers, I can talk to the regulators, I can tell stories with photos and text and narrative around geography. So let's back away from this notion a moment. Most people think of GIS as technology that they use for applications or technology that they use for science. But another meaning for GIS is that GIS is science. It's the science of measurement, it's the science of digital abstraction, it's the science of visualization, the science of analytics, the science of decision support, and so forth. This diagram shows a kind of interesting flow from measuring our world to visualizing it and then analyzing relationships and patterns and then driving that into the design and planning process, and then that supporting decision support and then on into action. And if you look at each of the utility companies that do apply GIS, while they may not see it this way, in fact, they're doing little pieces of exactly this, a kind of transformational process that's beyond simply the technology. Now, I like to call this the science of where. Isn't that a cool statement? It's sort of like a different way. You know, I've been fighting my entire bloody life. I do GIS. My mom never understood it. Nobody understood it, actually. But they would understand this, the science of where, which is the science of geography and the technology of GIS and geospatial technologies. This science supports these information systems, and most of you are familiar with them. They basically are about data input from design or transactions, updating, also real-time information, and increasingly imagery and LiDAR sorts of measurements. And the outputs of these systems support simple map making and analytics, sometimes big analytics, or monitoring, dashboards, planning, and now more and more citizen engagement or customer engagement in various forms. So I'll just assert to you that this is an interesting platform for utilities to be smarter. Its history has been, okay, those guys down the hall, they're making those little maps and aren't they interesting and they support distribution and blah, blah, blah. What I'm going to present to you is that this is moving, particularly in the last year and a half with the advent of services, right front and center to a platform for managing utilities smarter. So the GIS components are familiar to most people. They're desktops, they're apps on devices, they're browsers, they're servers, and increasingly services fed by the cloud, like the weather service or, you know, all these layers are now becoming services. I can just take these dial tones and combine them in an integrated way, because geography is an integrated science. It looks at the relationships and patterns and connections and processes. So this technology is moving from isolated cells to getting connected, connecting to enterprise systems that cut across, that light up the office windows of every office in utilities. And also moving out further, we're starting to see that utilities and local government and national governments are serving each other. Like recently I was in a utility where I saw a person updating a distribution line, and behind them they had a base map. I said, oh, is that your engineering base map? He says, no, 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 this is not the company's base map at all. It's the county's base map. And I didn't take a copy of the data. I'm bringing it in as a map service, kind of like you would with a Google map. So what's occurring is cities, counties, states, federal agencies, utilities are starting to serve out their data as map services. And they reflect data underneath them. It's not just a picture. So we can begin to integrate and combine these services as networks. To me, that's so exciting. It's like a little nervous system emerging. We're creating a nervous system for the planet because all these measurements are now being served and people can integrate it and combine them in various ways. So GIS, let me just assert this, is becoming a distributed services platform. This means on any device, I can connect to some big data here, some pictures from over there, some maps from this agency, and I can mash them up and analyze them together with analytics. That's not just a Google map flying around like Superman. This is the ability to bring in real data in real time. So we simply are now saying GIS is getting smarter. It's bringing together advanced analytics, real-time data, smart mapping tools, 3 and 4D information, spatial temporal information, and the pattern that it's being displayed in or realized in is on the web and in the cloud, in distributed architectures, and also available, accessible through devices. And we're starting to see how this is affecting energy companies, utility companies. It's affecting actually all kinds of agencies and companies of many types. So what do we mean by smart? First, it integrates real-time data. So it's integrating the so-called Internet of Things, everything that's changing and moving. Like in Smart Dubai, they're integrating all cars, all electrical usage, all energy usage, everything. And they're bringing it into spatial maps that they can combine and interrelate with all of their other data in the government. And the same thing is happening in natural resources. This is sort of like GIS as enabling or as a platform for IoT. The picture here is FEMA, and it's their emergency center, or the center picture is the Seattle Police Department, where everything is being brought together. Smart GIS also integrates imagery, all types of imagery, like just-in-time information, satellite pictures that were taken last night, new drone maps. I can send up a drone, and for a few $100s, I can have a piece of software, turn it into an ortho map, and integrate it right in with my GIS. Smart GIS is also about connecting everyone into a system of engagement so that individuals can share maps and data with their organizations or their community. Through identity, everybody has an identity. Smart GIS is also about analytics behind all of this data. Traditional spatial analytics, but increasingly interactive analytics and big data analytics, specifically interactive analytics like exploratory spatial BI. It's kind of like Tableau, except that the data is all spatial. I can drag and drop and make charts and graphs and explore data. I can also take my billion observations of all my customers, or all the lightning strikes in America, like this top one, or the bottom one is a 40 billion pixel raster array looking at solar site suitability. It's a surface tool. And finally, smart GIS, the services environment, distributed environment, can integrate the field. So my field people can have devices, and they're taking a little GIS with them, except that it's services dial-toned into their device. Helps them navigate, and when they collect data, it's going right back into the enterprise environment. So it's connecting the field with the enterprise. It has enormous implications for performance and work and situational awareness. So let me summarize. Smart GIS is about integrating at all. It's integrating our systems of record, like distribution, assets, et cetera, property, with systems of engagement. Everybody has an identity. I'm Jack, I have privileges. With systems of insight, where I can actually do analytics and create knowledge. And unlike classic IT, all these three systems are integrated into one platform. That means collaboration across the enterprise is possible. So mapping and GIS have never been so important to utilities. That's my sense of it. As this big data grows up, as we search for new frontiers, for recreating, for transforming utilities is really important. Providing a language of understanding and also for creating better utilities. But I've talked largely about, and I live in this world, technology world. It's very promising. But the reality is the technology and the smart innovations that are going on, even the science of where, as I call it, are not enough. It's really important that leaders, people like you here in the room, get a sense of this. Imagine how you could take all the information and integrate it, visualize it, spatially analyze it, interpret it into, I mean, I don't really care about big data, I care about big understanding. Interpret it all into big understanding that can be decision support tools that drive utilities. So implementing to me as an outsider from your fields, to me it's sort of like essential. Why don't they just wake up and realize that utilities are geospatial in nature? All of their assets are geospatial. I mean, we've got all these financial systems, we've got personal record keeping systems, but the core assets of a utility company are all geospatial. Your customers, your assets, all of it. So I think the topic of this whole conference has been about designing and thinking through, to me, that's all, creating a utility for the future. This is, I think, foundational that geospatial strategies occur. So that's sort of what I wanted to talk about, Gigi. And yeah, thank you.
I think we have time for some questions.
Yeah, sure.
I know someone will yank me off when we have to, but
You need a mic, though.
yeah,
He needs a mic.
we'll figure that. Yeah, okay. My first question for you is, what keeps you up in terms of cybersecurity? With this unique perspective, what's your greatest concern around cybersecurity and GIS?
Well, I guess my customers are very concerned, and our customers are all across the intel agencies, all the military organizations. They all run on geospatial tech. So they're right on the front because they're being attacked every day. So being able to, this technology is not about some stuff just hacked together and thrown together. It has to have layers of security built into it that protect, well, generically all of my customers, and utilities are not beyond that. They're front and center for infrastructure that needs to be protected. So everything from PKI security for individuals to data management security to access, all of this is important, and we worry about it a lot. We have whole teams that layer on top of the GIS technology that worry about and look at cybersecurity. And I'll just say, once again, our customers are being attacked every day.
Right. Yeah.
By some of the most vicious cyber attacks that I could describe. I mean, I have more visibility than most human beings because we're being confronted all the time, not just our company, but our customers' organizations.
Are you finding ways that GIS can actually provide a layer of defense, or how does it be not a vulnerability, but an asset in protecting your customers?
Well, there's a lot of things I guess I want to say. One of them is that GIS is being used in cybersecurity to trace back geographically the networks to where the origin was.
Interesting.
So, the sixth floor in a building in an unnamed country, we know very well because we were able to see it.
Okay. I'm glad I'm not on that sixth floor right now.
And by this server and that server and that server. And I don't mean to scare you. I'm just simply saying our customers include customers that are looking at geospatial as a way to analyze and understand better cybersecurity threats.
Interesting.
And then they do analytics.
I'm going to open it up for questions.
Yeah.
I'll bring the mic over to you.
Yeah.
The way you described the sourcing of the data into it almost sounded very open source, almost Wikipedia-like. I mean, it kind of felt like that. So who can contribute data, and how do you verify the validity of that data, that it's truth and not somebody's hacked version of the truth when they put the data into the system?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we build software that can be, on premises. That's where most of our software is. So in your own infrastructure, in your own big server farm. And then we also build a cloud platform just like Salesforce. We have 4 million subscribers to that. In that platform, users share their data or they don't share their data in that environment. Some of it is definitely open source content sharing. In that platform also, there's a lot of open source app sharing, and a lot of innovation is happening. So just like Google, we have a base map for the world, we have imagery for the world, we have 600 layers of demographics and natural resource data for the entire planet. So it's like a big living atlas that our users subscribe to. And then they sometimes will put their data in the cloud and overlay it against that more open data. And in the last 3 years, 8 million data sets have been shared by our users so that other users can use it. So in that sense, yes, it's sort of open source or open data, open geodata. Does that answer your question? Each data set that people, is it real? Each data set that people shares carries a metadata stamp with it and a whole record of who created it. And, so when USGS shares a piece of data, it has their stamp on it, it has their metadata and origin and trace back how it was created. There's a lot of, we support now 6,000 schools, K through 12 schools, with our software free across America. Lots of kids are sharing data every day. So what's the metadata stamp? Well, Roosevelt High, Johnny Williams, he did this, something like that. At the other end of the scale, you have NGA, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, who's sharing, for example, climate change in the Arctic. And just like any metadata, you check it out. So, yeah.
So what I'm going to do now is actually, we have the ability to bring Bill and Ian to the stage. Sure. Yeah, want to come up and we'll expand the conversation. Stay there,
You have to bring
Jack.
a chair, Ian.
Yeah, come on in. I'll get a chair.
Okay, I'm probably the only Australian in the room, so if you don't get the accent, it's Australian. Bit of a mix between Victoria and Queensland. Ian McLeod, I work for a company called NZN doing digital asset management and the energy manager type role. I was the CEO of Ergon Energy Corporation before it was merged with Energex, and also on the Queensland Future Board, advisor to a number of companies as well. So I love space. And Bill, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Bill Meehan. My title is Director of Utility Solutions here at Esri. So 25 years ago, I met Jack and I kind of heard his vision. 20 years ago, I actually began to really listen to Jack and build my vision. And then 15 years ago, I joined the company. So I kind of run the utility practice for Esri.
Yeah, thanks for that, Bill. Look, my interest in spatial, in Ergon, we actually had a big problem around vegetation and the environment. We didn't really understand how our assets were relating to the environment. I couldn't see. It was a big black hole. I could see how much I was spending on the contractors, though. It was about $104 million a year. So I could physically go out and test these assets, etc., but I couldn't see the environment. In terms of the Esri product and location, I love that thing about the science of where. I think that's fantastic. I'm sure your mother would love that. How do you see the different applications into the traditional distribution business, utility business. And what about the future? We've got all this transactive energy going on. We've got batteries out there. Well, certainly Australia's got a lot of PV. 30% of the houses in my patch had PVs on the roof. How do you deal with those sorts of issues with spatial information? So, Bill, you want to
Try it?
Yeah, go ahead. You start, Jack, and I'll follow up.
Well, the traditional applications of GIS were asset management. Where are the lines? Where are the devices? Where's the switches? All of that. And the energy companies have spent billions on automating that, sort of like automating all the drawings and then putting data behind it. But there are at least a dozen other departmental systems, customer management, market research, vegetation management, for example, in your case, transportation, that GISs have been growing up into. And now there's some new ones because of the advent of big data capabilities and the integration of imagery. There's just all kinds of new capabilities. So the services environment that I described can take these sort of stovepipe traditional systems and federate them together. So I see, maybe to answer your question, Ian, there's two things that are occurring. One is spatial is going into everything else. It's becoming front and center in the IT organizations. People are finding spatial keys are important and relevant for running their business. And the second thing is that the distributed systems are now serverizing themselves. They're becoming services rather than database cans. They may have a database can, but they're serving it out as REST services. So this means that I can achieve enterprise integration of all these stovepipes through map integration, like map overlay. I can see where my customers are from this service and where my tax districts are from that service. I combine them. I can do analytics dynamically. And in the past, you had to put it all in a database. So this combination of an enterprise approach through services and this whole new bunch of technology like real-time data, big data analytics, in-dimensional space-time tools, it's like this whole boatload of stuff arrived, and utilities are starting to pick it up. But they've got to have vision to bring it into their organizations. It isn't just the old automation of maps anymore. Does that answer what you're talking about?
No, that's great. I think being able to visualise it through a portal and giving... I once went to our people and said, well, what if I could replicate the experience you have on the web at work, rather than going into your GISs, your ERPs, those sorts of things? What if I could make it that simple?
Yes.
And I think the spatial actually does that. What's your view, Bill?
Well, I've got a couple of stories. I always tell stories. When I was working for the power company, we always did things sort of in reverse order. So, for example, instead of digging up the sidewalk before the city paved the street, we would always dig the sidewalk up after they paved the street. And so why is it so hard to be able to find out what the paving schedule is for the city and the digging schedule for the utility? Why is that so hard? And I think I see people shaking their heads because they know that that happens. The technology today is I could create, and I can create, a web service of my paving schedule as the city and a web service of the digging schedule for the utility and simply put them together. Yeah. And I can then bring in a whole bunch of others like weather and all of this sort of stuff to be able to do what now we call spatial analysis, or gaining insight as to what the heck is going on right now. Yeah. So that's just a simple story of how we could do things so much better.
And we can also wrap that into a app. So it isn't just these maps. You can mash them up and then turn it into an app.
Yeah.
So if something fires up in one of these distributed data sets, the app maybe notifies me or does whatever it does.
One other point is that the utility industry employees are now in the US probably on an average of 52, 54 years old. I always thought that sounded young until now it's sort of old. So, but what happens is there's a lot of knowledge walking out the door. And now we have to sort of replace that knowledge with more science-based, like the spatial analytics. People sort of knew stuff, right? They kind of know stuff. I know where things are. Those people are gone. We need to have systems and science in place to understand the impact, not just of where things are, but how it impacts the whole community. And that's really what GIS does. Very well.
Nervous system.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I think you're right. In terms of the science and maths that sits behind there, before, in our case, we had 160,000 kilometres of assets. It was 1 million square kilometres. And what do I know, how do I know what's going on out there? What's the risk profile of that area? So knowing what's out there, understanding that risk is different to these systems because you can bring it all together. Yeah. Just from so we had in Queensland just yesterday, we had Cyclone Debbie hit central Queensland. I was here last year in October and you had Matthew hit the coast. Can you give me a bit of an idea on, I guess what we see, let's not talk about climate change and all those sorts of things. I remember Rod West putting up a slide when I got him over to Australia at one stage. He said, don't want to talk about that, but here are the events. And here's the how often they're now happening. So let's not worry about the science, it's just happening more and more. So disaster resilience and spatial intelligence, how have you been using that across the world to help utilities and what can we do extra in that space?
To me, the big excitement, well, again, a story of Katrina, huge monumental impact in this country, and nobody was able to collaborate that event. 10 years later, whatever it was, 10 or 15 years later, Sandy hit New York. At that time, it was dramatically different. FEMA had services that the city could use. The city was sharing services that FEMA could use. State agencies started collaborating. I mean, it was not perfect by any means, but suddenly we had collaboration built around collaborative services, and that changed the game. That's one answer. The other answer is emergency response in utility companies is going to be stepped up. The dials are stepping up, and you're speaking to it as a result of climate change. Those are the two big things.
And what about planning for the future? I guess we went through an exercise of starting to use all these data overlays to plan the resiliency of the network. And I remember a mayor saying to me at one stage, well, Ian, we don't want you to spend more money. I said, look, it's not about spending money. I'll spend the same amount of money, but I'll do it much wiser than I otherwise would.
Well, there's the long-term planning, and Bill, you'll probably have something to say about that. But when Katrina hit, how many of you remember that, actually? So when Katrina hit, it went right up, into Louisiana. But right after it, there was another hurricane that went up into Texas. Do you recall what that was?
Was it Rita? Rita, that's right. Rita. Yep.
And it was the most amazing experience because, let's see, what's the utility here?
Centerpoint.
Centerpoint, yeah, right. Excuse me, those of you from Centerpoint. Anyway, what Centerpoint did was they took the hurricane track and put it onto a map. And then they generated a digital buffer zone around that hurricane track. Any of you here involved in this? And then they overlaid that buffer zone, that kind of like a Frankfurter, shaped thing on top of all their assets. And they made a recording, tabular recording of all the assets that are going to be affected by that thing. And then they loaded their truck with all those assets, loaded the trucks with all those assets, drove them right down where the hurricane was going to go, and then went to the side. And then the hurricane, sure enough, went right up that alley. All those things were wiped out, and they just drove the trucks in and replaced everything in days. That was all GIS driven. In contrast, in Louisiana, nothing like that was planned. And as a result, it was weeks and months before they were able to restore power to many locations. So I think GIS's geospatial thinking is not only relevant, I think, for real time, it's also relevant for near real time, and then it's also relevant, probably what you want to speak about planning.
Well, just the long term is that I always think of risk as equal to vulnerability plus consequence. And I worked for a power company for many years, and we kind of always looked in silos. We looked at our own data. But the ability to bring in lots more data together all of a sudden gets that, aha, we have got really problems. And I think of even Superstorm Sandy. You know, where do people have the flood maps in the utility company? Well, it's in some, who has the flood maps? Nobody knew.
Right.
Bringing in the flood maps, the flood gauges, the real-time data, and now all of a sudden it's, aha, we got a problem here, we'll deploy our resources, and in the long term, we'll be able to spend our money over there.
Well, yeah, I think utilities are going to operate, I mean, not that they don't operate now, but they're going to operate digitally simultaneously, all different parts of it'll operate with simultaneous. Measurement will be happening in the field with devices, onto digital maps in the cloud, where control rooms can see what's being measured, and there'll be action happening. So we're going to compress. I mean, it used to be you send out a field crew, they measure, then they get it, eventually they react. That's all becoming real time. You're measuring at the same time you're acting. So the big thing for digital transformation for me is simultaneity. Organizations will operate at the speed of light, and they'll use maps as a language to really understand it, because it's not going to be about data, and we won't have time to do that. And one of our customers is WHO, World Health Organization. They're doing immunization this week in Baghdad, Iraq, polio immunization. And the immunizers are using a device. They're putting the immunization record on this digital map, and in Geneva, WHO, they're actually looking at and tracking this and giving the immunizers direction. And they can do analysis in real time, they can do management in real time. And that little example, that's the example, by the way, that shut Ebola down in West Africa. That's the kind of tech that needs to go into utilities, so we're not only real-time measuring voltage, but we're real-time measuring where the workforce is and what they're doing, and we're aggregating it, and we're seeing it, and driving, the management of it. Okay.
We do have to go. I think
Yes,
Jack's got a flight to catch.
We've
and,
got the 2-minute warning, so we do have to go. So look, I certainly just wrap up by saying, fantastic having you here, Jack.
Thank you for inviting me, by the way.
You're a leader in the industry. I love spatial stuff. So, and look, it will make a real difference, whether it's resilience, whether it is putting distributed energy resources in their society, sharing things. This is a sharing society. So understanding where those resources are and connecting them and sharing them and measuring is extremely important. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Bill.
You're welcome.
And thank you, everyone else.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Jack. You better run. All right. By the way, if anybody wants more information, I'm going to be here for the